A 7-year-old girl walked into the most dangerous room in the city. She was soaking wet. She was alone. And in her small hand, pressed flat against her palm like it was the most important thing in the world, because to her, it was a crumpled $5 bill. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She walked past men who had made grown adults beg for their lives, climbed into a chair across from the most feared man in the Westport district, folded her hands on his mahogany table, and looked him dead in the eyes. Marco Delano had run Westport for 15 years. He had sat across from killers, corrupt officials, and desperate men willing to say anything to save themselves. Nobody, not once, not in 15 years, had ever made him go completely still. This child did. Because when he asked her what she needed, she didn't flinch. She didn't look at the floor. She pushed that $5 bill across the table toward him and said 7 words that none of his men standing outside that door would ever forget. "This is everything I have. Help me." Her mother had been taken 3 days ago. She had been alone in their flat ever since. No family, no money, no help. The police had written her name on a form and done nothing. And so this child, 7 years old, almost 8, had walked a mile through the rain in the dark to find the one man in the city that everyone feared, because he was the only one she believed would actually keep his word. What happened next inside that room, what she said that made Marco Delano freeze, what he did with that $5 bill, and what it set in motion before the night was over, is one of the most extraordinary things you will ever hear. Stay with us. The gun went off at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and nobody in the Westport district called the police. They never did. The shot came from the alley behind Delano's supper club, a single clean crack that split the rain-soaked air and died just as quickly. A stray cat scattered. A window light flicked off. And within 30 seconds, the street was as quiet as it had been before, as if the sound had never happened at all. That was how things worked in Westport. Not because people were cruel, but because they understood, the way people understand weather and gravity, that certain forces simply existed, and Marco Delano was one of them. He had run the Westport district for 15 years without a single front-page headline. No courtroom appearances. No federal investigations. No dramatic standoffs in broad daylight. Just a quiet, consistent, almost bureaucratic control over 4 square miles of the city's south end. Its loan businesses, its late-night card rooms, its import routes, its silence. People paid him on time. People kept their mouths shut. And people never, under any circumstances, brought their problems to his door unless they were the kind of problems he sanctioned. He was not cruel. That was the thing people misunderstood about Marco Delano. Cruelty was inefficient. Cruelty made noise, and noise attracted attention. And attention was the only thing in the world he genuinely feared. He was precise. He was fair, by the standards of his particular world. And he kept his promises, every single one, without exception, which was why, in Westport, his word carried more weight than any contract a lawyer had ever written. He had 3 rules. Everyone in Westport knew them. Pay on time. Stay silent. No children in business. That was it. That was the entire operating manual. 3 rules, 15 years. 0 exceptions. Tonight, sitting alone at his corner table in the back room of the supper club, he was reviewing the week's ledgers with a glass of red wine he hadn't touched yet. The room was warm. The rain hammered the skylights. Reed, his most trusted lieutenant, a quiet man with a boxer's build and an accountant's mind, sat at the far end of the table, working through a separate set of figures. It was, by every measure, a normal Tuesday night. Then Reed's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Read it twice. Looked up at Marco. "There's someone at the side entrance asking for you." Marco didn't look up from the ledger. "Who cleared them?" "Danny." "He's confused about it." "About what?" Reed paused for just a moment, and Reed never paused. "About whether he should let her in." Marco looked up. "Her. She's a child, Marco. A little girl. Maybe 7, 8 years old. Standing in the rain alone. Danny says she asked for you by name. Said she was told you could help her. The room went very still. Marco set his pen down. He looked at Reed with a particular expression he reserved for things that were genuinely unexpected, which, in 15 years, had been almost nothing. A child. Yes. At my side entrance. Yes. At midnight. It's 11:52, but, yes. Marco sat back in his chair. The leather creaked. He picked up his wine, took the first sip of the night, set it back down. Then he said, in a voice that gave away absolutely nothing, "Bring her in. Clear the room." She was soaking wet. That was the first thing. She stood in the doorway of his back room in a yellow raincoat that was a size too small, her braids flattened against her cheeks, her shoes leaving small dark puddles on the hardwood floor. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Maybe 7.5, if you were being generous. She was black, small-boned, and serious in a way that 7-year-olds almost never are, a gravity behind her eyes that had no business being there at that age. In her right hand she carried a folded piece of lined paper. In her left, pressed flat against her palm, was a crumpled $5 bill. She looked around the room once, quickly, methodically, the way someone does when they're frightened but have decided not to show it. Then she looked directly at Marco Delano and did not look away. Marco gestured to the chair across from him. She crossed the room, climbed into the chair, and sat with her back straight and her hands folded on the table in front of her, the $5 bill and the folded paper placed carefully between them, like documents at a meeting. Marco studied her for a moment. Then he said quietly, "What's your name?" "Lily," she said. "Lily Reeves." "How old are you, Lily?" 7. "Almost 8. Who brought you here tonight?" "Nobody. I came by myself." Marco glanced at Reed, who was standing by the door. Reed gave the smallest shake of his head. She had indeed been alone. Marco looked back at the girl. "How did you know where to find me?" "Mrs. Okafor told me," Lily said. "From the corner store on Birch Street. She said if anyone in Westport could help, it was you. She said you're a man who keeps his promises." She said it plainly. Not as flattery. As information, the way someone repeats instructions they were given and have memorized carefully. Marco leaned forward slightly. "What do you need help with, Lily?" She unfolded the piece of lined paper and turned it to face him. It had a name written on it in careful, large handwriting. The handwriting of someone who had written it slowly, deliberately, so it would be legible to a stranger. "Claire Reeves." "That's my mum," Lily said. "She was taken 3 days ago. 2 men came to our flat. They said my dad owed them money, $20,000. My dad died 8 months ago in an accident, and they said his debt came to us. My mum said she didn't have it. She said she'd find a way to pay them back slowly, but they didn't want to wait." Her voice was steady. Unnervingly steady. "They took her instead." The room was completely silent. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. "I went to the police," Lily continued. "They wrote everything down. A man gave me a number to call. I called it the next morning and they said someone would look into it. Nobody came. I called again and a different man said they were working on it. That was 2 days ago." She pushed the $5 bill across the table toward Marco. "This is everything I have," she said. "Mrs. Okafor said you're a man who solves problems. I need you to solve this one. I need you to bring my mum home." Marco looked at the $5 bill. He looked at Lily. He said nothing for a very long time. Reed cleared his throat from the doorway. Marco didn't look at him. He was still looking at the $5 bill, crumpled, slightly damp from the girl's hand, sitting in the middle of his mahogany table like the most absurd thing he had ever seen in 15 years of running Westport. "Lily," he said finally, "who are the men that took your mother? Did they give a name?" "The Brandt brothers," she said immediately, as though she had been rehearsing it. "The one who talked was Edgar. The other one didn't say much. His name is Callum. They came in a black car. I watched from the window. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Reed's expression. Marco caught it without turning around. He knew the name. Of course he knew the name. Edgar and Callum Brandt had been operating out of the South End for the better part of 2 years. Pushing drugs, running numbers, and recently, according to whispers that had been irritating Marco for months, expanding into territory that bordered on his own. They were loud, reckless, and arrogant in the way that men are arrogant when they've been allowed to grow without opposition. Marco had been watching them the way a man watches a crack in a wall. Monitoring it, calculating the moment it would need to be addressed. He had not expected the moment to arrive like this. "How long were you alone in your flat?" Marco asked. 3 days, Lily said. "What did you eat?" For the first time, something flickered across her face. Just briefly. Not quite embarrassment. Something more complicated than that. "Crackers," she said. "And water. We had crackers in the cupboard." 3 days. A 7-year-old girl. Crackers and tap water. While her mother sat God knows where in God knows what condition. Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up from his chair, slowly, the way he did everything, and walked to the door. He opened it, leaned out, and said to the man standing in the corridor, "Get something warm from the kitchen. Soup, bread, whatever we have. And get Yolanda in here." He came back to the table and sat down. Lily was watching him with the same careful, unreadable expression. She hadn't moved. She hadn't touched the $5 bill. "Lily," Marco said, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Okay? I'm going to ask you to do something. And I need you to trust me when I tell you it's the right thing to do." She nodded slowly. "I want you to go with Yolanda. She works for me, she's safe. And I want you to go back to Mrs. Okafor's store and wait there tonight. Can you do that? Are you going to help my mum?" No hesitation. Straight to the point. Marco looked at her directly. "I'm going to find her. That's not the same as helping her." He almost smiled. "Almost. You're right. It isn't." He paused. "I'm going to bring her home." Lily studied him with those grave, exhausted eyes. Then she reached out, picked up the $5 bill, and pushed it closer to him. "You didn't take it. I see it. You have to take it. Mrs. Okafor said you don't do things for free. She said that's not how it works." "Mrs. Okafor is usually right," Marco said. He reached out and picked up the bill. He held it for a moment, then folded it carefully and placed it in the breast pocket of his jacket. "We have a deal, Lily Reeves. Your mother's name is Claire. She'll be home before morning. I promise you that." Lily looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, like someone completing a formal transaction, she nodded once. "Okay," she said. She slid off the chair, stood up straight, and walked to the door where Yolanda, a stout, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, was already waiting with a bowl of soup and a gentleness she usually kept well hidden. Marco watched her go. The moment the door closed, Reed was beside him. "You know we can't do this," Reed said. Low, urgent, not quite an argument, the voice of a man who knows he's already losing one. "Can't do what?" "Go to war with the Brandts over a $20,000 civilian debt." "Marco. We have rules. You have rules. There's a reason we don't involve children." "She involved herself," Marco said. He turned back to the table and picked up his wine glass. "She walked through my door in the middle of the night, alone in the rain, after 3 days by herself on crackers and water, because the police wouldn't help her and there was nobody else." He drank. Set the glass down. "The rule exists to protect children from this world. This child's already in it. We didn't put her here. The Brandts did." Reed said nothing. "Pull everything we have on Edgar and Callum Brandt," Marco said, his voice shifting, no longer conversational, now operational. "Locations, operations, who they use, where they move. I want it in an hour. And if what we find is bigger than a kidnapped woman?" Then we'll deal with what's bigger. Reed exhaled through his nose. Took out his phone. You know this is going to cost us something. Most things worth doing do, Marco said. He picked up his pen and went back to his ledger, as if they had been discussing the weather. 1 hour, Reed. Reed left the room. Marco sat alone for a moment in the silence. He reached up and touched the breast pocket of his jacket, lightly, just with 2 fingers, where the folded $5 bill sat pressed against his chest. Then he went back to his numbers. What came back in 53 minutes was worse than he'd expected. Cole, Marco's best surveillance man, a former military intelligence officer who had the unnerving ability to find information that didn't want to be found, spread 4 photographs and 2 printed sheets across the table. Reed stood opposite, arms crossed, watching Marco's face. The Brandt brothers haven't just been running debt collection, Cole said. The debt collection is a front. Or more accurately, it's a pipeline. Marco looked up from the photographs. They target households with outstanding debts, Cole continued. Usually inherited debts, husbands who died, fathers who borrowed. They find women alone with children, present the debt, know they can't pay it, and take them. They've done it at least 4 times in the last 8 months that we can confirm. The room was very quiet. Where are they holding them? Marco said. Cold storage warehouse. South end of Decker Road. Just inside the border of their territory. Cole tapped the map. 8 confirmed guards. Maybe 12. And Marco, he paused. Claire Reeves isn't alone in there. We're looking at 5 women total. Maybe more. Marco was still for a moment. Then he stood up from the table. Get me 30 men, he said. Armed, ready to move within the hour. I want Cole running perimeter, Parrish on breach, and I want 2 vehicles staged on Decker from the east before we move. He looked at Reed. And I want it clean. No unnecessary noise. We go in, we bring them out, we end this. Reed looked at him steadily. All of it. All of it, Marco said. By 1:30 in the morning, 31 men stood in the back hall of Delano's supper club. They stood in rows without being told to. They were quiet without being asked. Former military men, ex-law enforcement, career Westport. Men who had worked for Marco Delano long enough to understand that when he called them at this hour, it was not for something small. Marco stood at the front of the room. A map was pinned to the board behind him. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He simply began talking, and the room listened the way rooms listen to thunder. There is a warehouse on Decker Road. Inside that warehouse are 5 women being held against their will. One of those women has a daughter who is 7 years old, who walked through my door tonight alone, because there was no one else. He paused. Let that land. That ends tonight. The job is simple. We go in, we bring them out, and we make sure this never happens again. Every woman in that building comes out alive. Every guard who reaches for a weapon deals with the consequences of that choice. And the Brandt brothers, he paused again, will not be a concern to anyone in Westport after tonight. Nobody asked questions. Nobody shifted. Nobody looked at anyone else for reassurance. That was what 15 years built. Not just loyalty. Certainty. Cole has your assignments, Marco said. Move out in 20. He stepped back from the map. Reed fell in beside him immediately. 12 guards, Reed said quietly. Maybe more. I know. And if the Brandts aren't there? If they've moved the women? Then we find where they moved them, Marco said simply, and we go there next. Reed studied him for a moment. I've worked for you for 11 years. I know. I've never seen you break Rule 3. Marco said nothing for a moment. He reached into his breast pocket and touched the folded $5 bill. A brief, almost unconscious gesture. There's a first time for everything, he said. They moved out at 1:47 in the morning. Decker Road was empty at that hour, a wide industrial stretch of cracked tarmac and loading bays, lit by orange streetlights that turned everything the color of rust. The cold storage warehouse sat at the far south end, a long concrete building with a roll-down metal door at the front and a loading dock entrance on the east side. 2 vehicles were parked at odd angles near the front entrance. Light leaked from inside through the gaps in the corrugated walls. Cole's team went east. Parrish's team went around the back. Marco, Reed, and 6 others waited on the approach road in 2 dark vehicles, engine off, watching. Cole's voice came through the earpiece. Power junction is on the north wall. 30 seconds. Marco watched the building. Somewhere in there was Claire Reeves, who had done nothing except be left alone with a debt that wasn't hers and a daughter who was braver than any of them had a right to be. Ready, Marco said quietly. 10 seconds, Cole said. The orange streetlights on Decker Road flickered. Then the warehouse went dark. Everything happened fast after that. Parrish's team hit the loading dock first, a clean, coordinated breach that took less than 4 seconds. Guards scrambled in the dark. There were shouts. 2 short bursts of struggle that resolved quickly, the way things resolve when trained men encounter men who are used to frightening people who can't fight back. Marco and Reed moved through the main floor. The warehouse smelled of cold metal and damp concrete. Flashlight beams cut through the dark. Marco's men moved with practiced efficiency, covering angles, clearing sections, communicating in short, clipped signals. Then one of his men called from the interior. Back room. Doors chained. Marco crossed the floor in 10 seconds. A chain and padlock on a heavy interior door. He looked at the man beside him, who already had the bolt cutters out. 1 cut. The chain fell. Marco pushed the door open. The room inside was bare concrete, maybe 20 feet by 15. Cold, genuinely cold, the temperature of a room that had been deliberately kept that way. A single bare bulb on a wire, swinging slightly from the draft of the opening door. And against the far wall, 5 women. Sitting or huddled, blinking into the flashlight beams. Frightened, pale, some of them holding each other. 3 of them didn't look like they'd eaten properly in days. Marco's eyes moved across them quickly. He was looking for one face specifically. The face of a woman with a daughter named Lily who had walked a mile in the rain to sit across from him with $5 and a folded piece of paper. He found her in the corner. Claire Reeves was in her mid-30s, with Lily's same serious eyes and Lily's same careful, watchful stillness. Except that stillness, right now, was the stillness of someone who had been frightened for so long they had stopped expecting rescue. She was wrapped in her own arms. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, dried now. She was looking at the men in the doorway with an expression that was not yet hope. Hope was too dangerous, but something a step before it. Assessment. Marco stepped forward. He crouched down to her level, slowly, deliberately, making himself smaller in the way that only a man who is genuinely not trying to frighten someone would think to do. Your name is Claire Reeves, he said quietly. She stared at him. Your daughter's name is Lily, he said. She's 7 years old, almost 8, and she is safe, and she is waiting for you. Something happened to Claire Reeves' face that Marco would not describe to anyone afterward, not to Reed, not to anyone. It was the kind of thing that belonged only to the person who experienced it. But he saw it, and it moved through him like a current, and he kept his expression still and his breathing even, because she needed steadiness from him right now, not emotion. She sent you. Claire whispered. She came to find me, Marco said. There's a difference. He stood up slowly. Can you walk? Claire nodded. She was already pushing herself to her feet. Marco turned to Reed. Get all of them out. Everyone. Vehicles are on the road. Take them somewhere warm and safe and get a doctor. Then from the back of the warehouse came the sound of a commotion. Boots on concrete, a door banging, men's voices raised and then cut off sharply. Cole's voice in his ear. We've got them. Both of them. East exit. Marco looked at Reed. Reed nodded and took over, organizing the women, guiding them toward the exit with a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who only knew Reed by reputation. Marco turned and walked toward the east end of the building. Edgar Brandt was a big man who was used to that meaning something. He stood in the grip of two of Marco's men with the body language of someone who had not yet fully accepted what was happening. Shoulders back, jaw set, eyes moving around looking for the angle, the exit, the play. Callum Brandt, smaller and quieter, had already accepted it. He was pale and still and looking at the floor. Edgar's eyes landed on Marco as he approached, and he attempted something that might have been a smile. "Marco Delano," he said. "I've heard a lot about you." Marco said nothing. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Edgar Brandt the way he might look at a damaged piece of furniture, appraising the extent of the problem. "This is a misunderstanding," Edgar said. "Those women, that's a private debt matter. Nothing to do with your operation. You know how this works. Money owed is money owed." Marco still said nothing. "We can make a deal," Edgar said, and now the edge of uncertainty was beginning to leak through the bravado. "Whatever you want. We'll vacate the South District. We'll pay you a percentage. Whatever's fair. You're a reasonable man. People say that about you, that you took a mother," Marco said. His voice was so quiet that Edgar actually stopped talking to hear it. "From her daughter," Marco continued. "A 7-year-old girl. You took her mother over a debt that a dead man left behind." He tilted his head slightly. "That child walked a mile in the rain tonight to sit across from me and put $5 on my table. $5. That was everything she had. And she asked me to bring her mother home." Edgar said nothing. The angle-looking had stopped. "I want you to understand something before this is finished," Marco said. "I don't do this because I'm a good man. I'm not a good man. I do this because you came into my city, and you did this thing in my city, and there is a little girl at a corner store on Birch Street right now who has been alone for 3 days on crackers and water, and she's almost 8 years old, and she is braver than you will ever be." He stepped back. He looked at Cole. The scene cut away before anything else happened. Mrs. Okafor's corner store on Birch Street was technically closed at 2:15 in the morning. The sign said so. The gate was half pulled. But the lights inside were on, warm and yellow against the wet street, and if you looked through the glass you could see Mrs. Okafor herself behind the counter. A wide, sturdy Yoruba woman in her 60s with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, pretending to organize a shelf of tinned tomatoes that had been organized perfectly for the past 2 hours. She was not organizing tomatoes. She was waiting. And she was praying, quietly, in the way she had prayed through 63 years of life. Not dramatically, not with closed eyes, but as a continuous low murmur beneath everything else she was doing, like a river running underneath a road. Lily sat on a stool behind the counter. She had eaten the soup, all of it, and a full bread roll, and a cup of warm tea that Mrs. Okafor had made without asking. The bowl was pushed to one side. Lily sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the front door. She had not slept. Mrs. Okafor had suggested it twice, both times gently, both times unsuccessfully. "You should rest, my dear," he said before morning. "I know," Lily said. "I'll sleep when she's here." Mrs. Okafor had not argued with that. You couldn't argue with something that logical. So they waited. The two of them, the old woman pretending to sort tins, and the small girl in the yellow raincoat with her eyes on the door, in a warm shop on a wet street at 2 in the morning, waiting for a promise to come true. At 2:22, headlights swept across the front of the store. Mrs. Okafor set down the tin in her hand. She removed her glasses. She turned toward the door. Lily did not move from the stool. But her whole body changed, went very still, the way an animal goes still before something important happens, every part of her focused on the door. The bell above it rang. And Claire Reeves walked in. She was in a coat that wasn't hers, big on her, someone else's, and her hair was loose and her eyes were swollen, and she stood in the doorway of Mrs. Okafor's store for exactly 1 second before she saw her daughter sitting behind the counter. 1 second. Then Lily slid off the stool. She didn't run. That was the thing. She walked, quickly, yes, but with that same deliberate, serious gravity she had carried into the supper club 2 hours ago. She crossed the store floor in 7 steps and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, and Claire Reeves dropped to her knees on the linoleum and pulled her daughter against her chest and held on with the particular fierceness of someone who has spent 3 days being terrified of exactly this, of never getting to do this again. Neither of them said anything. Mrs. Okafor suddenly found the shelf of tinned tomatoes absolutely fascinating. She turned her back to give them the moment, and she continued her quiet, river-like prayer, and if there were tears on her face, they were between her and God. Marco stood in the doorway. He had not come inside. He stood on the threshold, one hand on the doorframe, the other in his pocket, and he watched. His face was unreadable in the way faces are unreadable when the person behind them is feeling something they have no practiced expression for. He had made hundreds of promises in 15 years. He had kept every one of them, because a promise in his world was the hardest currency there was. More reliable than money, more binding than any contract. But he could not remember the last time keeping a promise had felt like this. Like something had been restored rather than simply settled. After a while, he didn't know how long, he heard small footsteps on the linoleum. Lily appeared in front of him. She looked up at him with Lily Reeves' particular variety of seriousness, which Marco was beginning to understand was simply who she was. Not a mask for fear, not a performance of toughness, but the genuine expression of a child who had decided, somewhere in the last 3 terrible days, that falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. "You did it," she said. "I did it," he said. "You kept your promise." "I keep my promises, Lily." She studied him for a moment. Then she reached into the pocket of the yellow raincoat and produced something. She held it out to him. Another $5 bill. Folded in half, pressed flat with her fingers. Marco looked at it. "Where did you get that?" "Mrs. Okafor gave it to me," Lily said. "She said I might need it." She pushed it toward him. "You didn't take the first one." "Not really. You just kept it. So this is for what you did." "Because you did it." "I have your first $5, Marco said. "I don't need another one." "It's not about needing," Lily said patiently, with the tone of someone explaining something obvious. "Mrs. Okafor said you're a man who does things properly. That means you get paid properly. Even if it's only $5. Marco looked at the bill. He looked at her. Then, despite himself, something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. The muscle memory of a smile that had maybe not been exercised enough lately. He took the bill from her hand. "Thank you, Lily." "You're welcome," she said formally. He crouched down so they were at eye level. "I want to tell you something. And I want you to listen carefully, the same way you listened to me before." She nodded. "Your mother is not going to have any more problems," he said. "The men who took her are not going to be a problem for anyone anymore. And from tonight, your family is under my protection. That means nobody in Westport touches you. Nobody comes to your door. Nobody says your father's name to you again in a way that means something bad." He paused. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Lily was quiet for a moment. "You're saying it's over." "I'm saying it's over." "And you promise?" "Lily," he said. "I have never broken a promise in my life. I'm not starting with you." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Marco, who was not in the habit of being studied by anyone without feeling the urge to end the conversation, found himself holding still and letting it happen. Then Lily Reeves nodded. Once. The same formal, conclusive nod she had given him 2 hours ago across the mahogany table. The nod that said, "I have evaluated this, and I find it acceptable." "Okay," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Delano." She turned and went back to her mother. Marco stood up slowly. He stood in the doorway for another moment, watching Claire Reeves hold her daughter in the middle of Mrs. Okafor's linoleum floor. Then he stepped back, out into the wet street, and pulled the door gently closed behind him. Reed was leaning against the car, collar up against the rain, watching Marco with the expression of a man assembling a thought he wasn't sure how to deliver. "Well," Marco said. "She all right?" Reed asked, meaning Lily. She's fine. She's better than fine. Marco looked up at the street. The rain had eased to a drizzle. How's the other situation? Finished, Reed said simply. Marco nodded. The other women? Safe house on Millfield. Doctors already there. Cole's making sure they have everything they need tonight, and by tomorrow we'll have worked out longer-term arrangements. Good. They stood in the drizzle for a moment. Reed glanced at Marco, glanced away, glanced back. You're going to tell me you'd do it again, Reed said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm not going to tell you anything, Marco said. You already know. 3 months passed the way months do in Westport. Quickly for the people who ran things, slowly for everyone else. The Brandt brothers' operation dissolved inside a week. Their people scattered. Their territory absorbed quietly into the broader Westport arrangement, without drama, without ceremony, without a single headline. The cold storage warehouse on Decker Road was cleaned out. Cole saw to it personally. The 5 women who had been held there were relocated, supported, and connected to people who could help them rebuild. Quietly, without fuss, funded from a particular line in Marco's ledger that had no formal name. Claire Reeves went back to work at the hospital laundry where she had worked before everything fell apart. She took Lily to school every morning. She picked her up every afternoon. She started eating properly again. She started sleeping again. She did not talk about what had happened in that warehouse. Not to anyone. Not because she had been told not to. Nobody told her anything. But because some things, when they're over, are better left in the room where they ended. What she did do, about 2 weeks after coming home, was sit down at the kitchen table with Lily after dinner and ask her, carefully and directly, exactly what Lily had done to bring her mother home. Lily told her. All of it. Mrs. Okafor, the rain, the supper club, the mahogany table, the $5 bill, the man in the suit who had kept his face very still while she talked. Claire was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "Were you scared?" Lily considered this seriously. "Yes," she said. "But I was more scared of doing nothing." Claire reached across the table and held her daughter's face in both hands and looked at her for a long moment. "You are," she said softly, "the bravest person I have ever met." Lily accepted this with her customary gravity. Then she said practically, "Mrs. Okafor said I should write him a thank you letter. Is that what you do?" "I think," Claire said carefully, "that in this case, yes. That's exactly what you do." The envelope arrived at Delano's supper club on a Tuesday morning, 3.5 months after the night it all happened. It was small, the kind of envelope that holds a greeting card, and it was addressed in a child's handwriting, large and careful, each letter slightly separate from the last. The address was right. The name was right, Mr. M. Delano, Delano's Supper Club, Westport. Reed brought it to Marco during the morning review, holding it between 2 fingers the way you hold something you're not entirely sure about. "This came in the post," he said. Marco looked at the handwriting. He knew immediately. He opened it at his desk, alone, after Reed had left. Inside was a folded piece of paper, the same lined notepaper she had brought to his table, and a $5 bill. He unfolded the paper. It was a drawing. Done in crayons, carefully, with a particular seriousness that Lily applied to everything. It showed a man in a dark suit standing in a doorway, just an outline really blocky and earnest, the way children draw adults, with light coming from inside the door and rain outside. The man was tall. His hands were in his pockets, and the door he was standing in was open. Below the drawing, in the same large careful handwriting, "Dear Mr. Delano, thank you for keeping your promise. My mum is home. We are okay. I am sorry I don't have more money. I will pay you back properly one day when I am grown up. Mrs. Okafor says you probably don't need the money but that the thought is the important part. You told me once that you always keep your promises. I believe you. I think you are a good man even if other people don't know it. Thank you for bringing my mum home. Lily Reeves, age 7, almost 8. Marco sat at his desk for a long time after reading it. The supper club was quiet. Morning light came through the high windows. The letter sat open in front of him, next to the $5 bill, next to the first $5 bill he had kept in a small drawer of his desk since the night it all happened. Reed appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, Marco, the letter, the two bills side by side, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Good news. Come and see," Marco said. Reed crossed the room. Read the letter over Marco's shoulder. Looked at the drawing. Straightened up. "She's something else," Reed said quietly. "She is," Marco agreed. "You going to write back?" Marco thought about that. "What would I say?" Reed was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe just, that you got it. That she doesn't owe you anything." Marco looked at the drawing. The blocky figure in the doorway, the open door, the careful rain rendered in blue and gray crayon lines. "She drew me in a doorway," he said. "I noticed." She remembered that. He paused. "I was standing in the doorway at Okafor's store. I didn't go inside. She noticed that and she remembered it and she put it in the drawing." Reed said nothing. "She's 7 years old," Marco said. "Almost 8, Reed said. Marco almost smiled. He picked up the drawing and held it for a moment. Then he stood up, crossed to the wall behind his desk, where there was a corkboard he used for maps and contact sheets and operational notes, and pinned the drawing to the center of it. He took both $5 bills and tucked them into the frame of the board, one on each side of the drawing. He stepped back and looked at it. A crayon drawing of a man in a doorway. $10, total, pinned on either side. The entire sum of what Lily Reeves had paid him to do the most important thing he had done in 15 years. That evening, Marco sat alone at his corner table in the back room of the supper club for the first time since the night Lily had walked in. He had avoided the table, he realized. Not consciously exactly, but he had taken his morning reviews at the front desk, his evening meetings in the side room, his meals at the bar. He had not sat at the corner table in 94 days. He sat there now. The room looked the same. Same lamplight. Same leather chairs. Same rain on the skylights. It rained a lot in Westport, always had. He had sat in this room for 15 years making decisions, reviewing numbers, settling disputes, managing the invisible architecture of a world that most people in this city didn't know existed. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. But sitting here now, with a drawing pinned to the wall behind his desk visible through the open door of his office, he found himself thinking about something Lily had said, not during their formal conversation at the table, but afterward, at Mrs. Okafor's store, when he was crouched down to her level. He had said, "I'm not a good man." He hadn't meant to say it to her specifically. He had been saying it, more or less, to the Brandt brothers, or to the room, or to himself, in the way that people say things aloud to make themselves believe them. "I'm not doing this because I'm good. I'm doing this because it's mine and you violated it." But Lily had heard it. And she had put it in her letter. "I think you are a good man even if other people don't know it." A 7-year-old had looked at everything he was. All 15 years of it, the ledgers, the rules, the gunshot at 11:47 that nobody called the police about, and had filed him, without hesitation, in the category of good. He was not sure she was right. He was not sure she was wrong. He had spent a long time being comfortable with that ambiguity, with the idea that he existed somewhere between the categories, in the gray territory where the rules of his world held and the rules of the other world didn't quite apply. But something had shifted 94 days ago. Not dramatically. Not in the way of revelations. Just shifted. Like a piece of furniture moved an inch to the left. Everything looked the same, but the room felt different, and you kept reaching for things where they used to be and finding them slightly elsewhere. Reed came in at 7 o'clock with 2 glasses and a bottle. He stopped when he saw Marco at the corner table. "You're back at the table." "I'm back at the table," Marco confirmed. Reed sat down across from him. Poured both glasses. Didn't say anything else about it. They sat in silence for a moment, the comfortable silence of 2 men who have worked alongside each other through enough difficult things that words are often just decoration. Then Reed said, Cole got the final tally on the Decker Road situation. All 5 women are settled. 2 of them have family in other cities. They've relocated. The other 3 are in Westport. They're okay. Working, getting back to normal. Good. We didn't take a loss on it, Reed added. In case you were wondering. The operational cost was absorbed and the Brant territory has already. I wasn't wondering, Marco said. Reed looked at him. No. I wasn't thinking about whether we took a loss. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then, who are you and what have you done with Marco Delano? This time, Marco actually smiled. Not the almost smile, not the precursor, the real one. It was brief, and it suited him, and it was the first time Reed could remember seeing it in longer than he could immediately calculate. She asked me once, Marco said, if I was going to help her mother or just find her. She said, a child, 7 years old, she said, those aren't the same thing. Reed nodded slowly. She was right, Marco said. I've been finding things for 15 years. Managing things. Maintaining things. He picked up his glass. 94 days ago I actually helped someone. Not because it was mine to protect. Not because of territory or rules or business logic. Because a little girl put $5 on my table and asked me to. He drank. And it turns out, he said, that's the thing that feels most like what I thought I was doing all along. Reed looked at him for a long moment. Then he raised his glass. To Lily Reeves, he said. Almost 8. To Lily Reeves, Marco said. They drank. The drawing stayed on the wall behind Marco's desk for years. Longer than any map, any operational plan, any piece of paper that had ever been pinned to that board. Staff came and went. The supper club was renovated twice. The corkboard was replaced. But the drawing moved with it, always to the center, always with the 2 $5 bills tucked in on either side. People who worked for Marco knew better than to ask about it. New people sometimes asked Reed, who would look at them levelly and say, it's a reminder. And if they asked a reminder of what, he would say, that the most dangerous thing that ever walked into this building was 4.5 feet tall and wearing a yellow raincoat. Every year, on the same Tuesday in the same month, a small envelope arrived in the post. The handwriting on the outside grew incrementally more mature, more fluid, less labored, over the years. But the contents were always the same. A piece of paper, a drawing, and a $5 bill. The drawings changed. The first year it was the man in the doorway. The second year it was a corner store with a light on inside. The third year it was a woman and a girl holding hands on a street. As Lily got older, the drawings got more detailed, more accomplished. Colored pencils replacing crayons, perspective appearing, shading. But they were always the same quiet scenes. Always Westport. Always a light on somewhere in the dark. Marco kept every one. Claire Reeves, for her part, went on to do something that Marco learned about not from her but from a conversation between Reed and Cole that he happened to overhear 2 years later. She had gone back to school part-time, studying social work, because she wanted to help other women in the situation she had been in. Women with debts they hadn't made and children who were too young to be carrying what they were carrying. Marco had said nothing when he overheard this. But that evening he made a quiet arrangement, anonymous, through 3 intermediaries, to ensure that Claire Reeves' educational expenses were covered for as long as she needed them to be. He never mentioned it to anyone. It didn't go in the ledger. It had no operational purpose. It was simply a thing he did because it was the right thing to do and he could do it. He was beginning to find that those situations arose more often than he had previously noticed. Or perhaps they had always been there, and he had been too focused on the ledger to see them. Years later, a reporter writing a piece on organized crime in the city spent 3 months trying to get someone, anyone, in Westport to talk about Marco Delano. She spoke to shop owners, residents, community workers, anyone who would give her 5 minutes. She wanted the story she had come looking for. The fear, the coercion, the shadow economy, the violence. She found those things. But she also found something she hadn't expected. A corner store on Birch Street, run by an elderly woman named Mrs. Okafor, who had lived in Westport for 40 years and who, when asked about Marco Delano, folded her hands on the counter and said, "I'll tell you what I know. And what I know is this. One night, a little girl came into my store and asked me who in this neighborhood could be trusted to help someone when the official channels failed them. And I sent her to Marco Delano. And the next morning her mother came home. Now." She removed her glasses and polished them. "You can make of that whatever you like. But that's what I know." The reporter wrote it down. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't quite know what to do with it. She put it in the piece anyway, right at the end. Because sometimes the most complicated things are also, somehow, the most simple. And sometimes the truest thing that can be said about a person is not what they are, but what they did when a child put $5 on their table and asked them to be better than themselves. Somewhere in the city, Lily Reeves was almost 8. And then she was 9. And then she was 15, and serious and brilliant and known in her school as the girl who always helped people who needed it, who seemed to understand instinctively that asking for help was not weakness and that sometimes you had to walk into the most frightening room you could imagine and lay everything you had on the table. She knew where she had learned that. And every year on the same Tuesday, she sent a drawing and a $5 bill to a supper club on the west side of Westport. And every year, a man in a dark suit pinned the drawing to his wall and placed the $5 bill beside all the others, and sat back and looked at his wall for a long moment before going back to his ledger. And the lights in the supper club stayed on, warm and yellow, against the Westport rain. If this story moved you, if you found yourself rooting for Lily, holding your breath at that warehouse door, or feeling something shift when Marco smiled for the first time, then you already know what kind of storytelling this is. Don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button. Leave a comment telling us which moment got you the most. Was it the $5 bill on the table? The reunion at Mrs. Okafor's store? Or the drawing on the wall? And if you want more stories like this one, stories about courage in unexpected places, about the people who show up when no one else will, subscribe. Because we have more. And some of them will surprise you even more than this one did. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Lily would approve.